watching StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and I'm joined from Washington, D.C. by Robert A. Manning. He's a senior fellow with the Scowcroft Centre at the Atlantic Council. Mr. Manning, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Just wanted to get your views on the new law that's been passed in Beijing, which authorizes its Coast Guard to, among other things, fire on foreign vessels, even uproot structures that are put up on reefs or other islands that the Chinese consider their territory. The timing in terms of a couple of days into the Biden administration and what Beijing is asking for in terms of a reset of relations after the Trump administration. How do you see it? Do you see it as upping the ante of sorts?
I think it's extremely poorly timed because the Chinese appear to want a kind of a fresh start with Biden and want to kind of put a floor under the relationship, which has been in a kind of a death spiral under Trump. And this seems to go in the opposite direction. There's a strong bipartisan consensus on China, and it's mostly negative. And so if China is serious about trying to kind of restart the relationship, they need to demonstrate a change in behavior. And instead, they're reinforcing all the negative actions they have taken. This really escalates an already dangerous situation in the South China Sea and in the East China Sea. This law will take effect February 1st, so we'll have to see how it's implemented. But what they've done, I mean, it's kind of like Trump in a way, because it's all based on a big lie. Right? The International Court at The Hague has ruled very clearly in 2016 that all of their claims are bogus. They're not legitimate. And yet they're passing a law to protect the sovereignty of these claims. So it depending on what they do, but now Coast Guard ships can fire, but use any language by any means necessary. They can stop and board ships in what the Chinese consider their jurisdictional waters. That's the language in the law. And that, of course, is these economic zones of many other claimants, Vietnam, Malaysia, and so on, in Japan and the Senkakus. So it sort of sets itself up almost guaranteed to escalate conflict.
When you say guaranteed to escalate conflict, I mean, we've seen the beginnings of the Biden administration policy now coming into place in terms of them reaching out to various allies. I mean, in this area, Jake Sullivan has spoken to his counterpart in Japan and said the defense treaty with Japan, he's reasserted that the Senkakus are still involved. So when you talk about escalation, how do you think the Biden administration is going to respond to this so close into its?
I think it's going to be. Well, the one thing is this whole law has received surprisingly little attention so far in the United States. But I know Biden has a group of very experienced Asia hands, Kurt Campbell, and others. And I think they're watching this closely, and I expect some kind of response. But again, the law hasn't taken effect, and I think it really will depend how they enforce it, because there's a lot of potential dangers, as we've been discussing. They can stop. They claim they have the right to stop and board ships in which international law would consider to be the economic zones of other claimants, for example. And you have to remember also that China has the biggest Coast Guard. They have 500 ships. Some of them are 12,000 ton. They're almost destroyer size, and they have helicopters and so on. So it's ripe for incidental conflict and so on, and which is we've already seen, right? We've seen in the last year or two Chinese Coast Guard intervene in Vietnam and Malaysian waters where they were trying to begin to act on maritime gas and oil development,
Mhm.
and they tried to stop it. So this would suggest that they're likely to escalate that type of behavior.
From the points that you've raised, if you could just simplify in terms of, we've already seen the PLA Navy and
Right.
how it's been operating aggressively. Now, the Coast Guard, they also have maritime militias, which we see all the way, to South America and Ecuador when they travel with
Right.
their fishing fleets. What's the need for a law like this authorizing the Chinese Coast Guard to have all these powers?
Well, I guess they may see it as giving kind of political cover that it's just the Coast Guard, it's not the PLA Navy, and so it's in a different. It's kind of escalating the gray zone up to the
Mhm.
threshold.
Right. And now, when you talk about escalating uh, the wide powers, it's not only just firing boarding vessels, like you said, exclusion zones, destroying structures that are built on disputed territory, which we would look at internationally as disputed territory, but China claims it as its own, right?
Right. You have Malaysia, Vietnam, and Taiwan have all put structures of some type on their claims in the Parasols and Spratly Islands chains. And as I said, it depends how hard they want to enforce this law. But the law certainly equips the Coast Guard to take all those kinds of actions. And I suspect there'll be a huge response, and it comes in that not just for the Biden administration, but at a time when China and ASEAN are supposedly finalizing a code of conduct for the
Yeah.
South China Sea. So it sort of turns that into a fraud.
So where does this leave, say, Taiwan, when you're talking about the situation? We've seen how the aggressive, either air flights or
Right.
maritime exercises that are carried around out. Does this in any way change the equation in terms of how Beijing views Taipei?
No, I think they've been. I mean, I guess I see their strategy as one of attrition. That it's kind of like the frog in boiling water. They're gradually turning up the temperature, and how far they will go, we don't know. But they've been very aggressive in terms of air flights. They just
Yeah.
the record numbers over the last year in Taiwan airspace. So I think it's part of this larger assertive Chinese posture, and I think it makes it much more difficult for to if China expects the U.S. to uh, shape a different policy. I don't see
Yeah.
Biden needs something to work with from China, and they don't seem to be giving it to him so far, and I would expect that the U.S. and other like-minded countries would want to take this to the East Asia Summit and denounce the legality the of the very law because it doesn't have any standing based on the law of the sea treaty.
When you say illegality, well, we've seen UNCLOS, you mentioned it earlier in terms of the
Mm,
Philippines and the ruling there. But it
right.
seems Beijing doesn't care, apart from it saying that it wants international order, it doesn't care about international law.
Well, I think they have an a la carte approach to international law. I mean, ironically, they're the ones that have ratified the law of the sea
Yeah,
treaty as opposed to the
not the
U.S.
US.
And ironically, the U.S. Pretty much operates under the law of the sea treaty codicils, but hasn't ratified it. And China has ratified, and it sort of selectively applies it, and their interpretations of it vary from other members. They're they're also talking about the within this law, it gives them the ability to really disrupt any other. And they think there's a term they're using. Um, Let me just make sure I have it right. Um, Temporary exclusion zones.
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
in the law. So that means if the U.S. is sending freedom of navigation operations and the Chinese have decided that this week it's an exclusion zone, that's how is that going to work? I think it could very well get pretty ugly very fast.
And you used the word escalatory a lot in this chat that we're having, but when something like this happens, and as you pointed out, even when it's this temporary exclusion zone, it's raising the temperatures, it's raising the possibility of mistakes, it's raising the possibility of provocation, deliberate provocations as well. It's raising the possibility of something going wrong and actual conflict of some sort taking place in the maritime domain.
Yeah, it definitely raises the likelihood of incidental contact, and I think it also comes at an interesting time because over the last couple of years or so, the maritime ASEAN states,
Mm-hmm.
Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, have become more assertive of their claims, and so I think this is in part an attempt to intimidate the ASEAN claimants in the South China Sea.
And again, you mentioned it several times, but when we see reports of the Chinese top diplomat apparently reportedly seeking a summit with Biden and Xi
Right.
Jinping soon, how does that sit when this kind of action is being taken?
I have to confess, I don't understand the logic of their behavior because uh, I have many friends in Chinese think tanks who their America watchers know what's going on. They understand that there's a strong consensus that China's aggressive behavior and predatory industrial policies have really created a new bipartisan unity that's very hostile to China and its behavior. And so, if they're serious, they have to change their behavior. But I see no major
Yeah,
signs. They've done small things on the economic front. They've opened their financial markets, and there's money at a time when the central banks have near zero interest rates. So there's a lot of money flowing into the bond markets, and so Western financial firms. But it used to be, that U.S. businesses were the strongest supporters of the U.S.-China
yeah.
relationship. That's gone, and you see U.S. companies. I don't think it'll be decoupling the way the Trump administration said it, but I think they will be selectively exiting. So there are parts of their supply chain elsewhere. We're starting to see that. And so they really don't, there is no lobby for China in the United States anymore. They're
Hmm.
in the same
Yeah,
category as North Korea in that
and
sense.
it's so ironic that it's the double standards involved here when Beijing is saying that the U.S. Administration, the new administration, should be changing its behavior from what Trump was doing. On the converse side, it's doing just the opposite itself. I mean, here the world is
Right. Well,
looking for China to
my
change its
sense,
behavior.
yeah, my sense is that the Biden administration. The problem with the Trump I think a lot of people give them credit for kind of calling out China and saying we can't do business this way anymore. Um, but the way that they had no alternative, and they've been very destructive across the board. It's hurt American industry. Manufacturing is down. Trade deficits are up, and I think the Biden administration, if you read the writings of some of the people who have now taken positions, um, that the Trump what Trump did was define it as strategic competition, but
Hmm.
they never really articulated what are the terms of competition, what are the limits, and so I think the Biden administration intention is to kind of figure out how to manage competition in all the different realms. And but again, China has to give them something to work with, and so far it doesn't look good to me. And Biden has very little room to maneuver. He's got a razor thin
Yeah.
majority in the Congress, and so there he has to be able to point to something that legitimizes a shift in policy towards China.
Sure. Robert A. Manning, absolutely appreciate your insight. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate your giving me the time.
And just a reminder to all of you who subscribe to our channel, you can, of course, just click on the button on YouTube to subscribe to our videos. You can also follow us on social media, on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and support our kind of journalism by getting onto our website. This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi.